Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to Hello Spirit Speaking. On Friday, August 28th, we will experience a full moon and lunar eclipse in Pisces. And over the next several days, you're probably going to hear a lot about this eclipse. What does it mean? What should you expect? And what should you release? What should you do when it happens? But today I want to take this conversation somewhere deeper, because I don't believe the most valuable question is what's going to happen during the eclipse. I think the more useful question is, what can this moment help me understand about myself? Because spiritual growth isn't about waiting for something in the sky to change our lives for us. It's about recognizing the moments that invite us to become still enough to see ourselves more clearly. And that's how I want us to approach this Pisces lunar eclipse. Not with fear, not with the expectation that something dramatic has to happen, and certainly not with the belief that you're supposed to feel or experience something simply because an eclipse is taking place. Instead, we can use this as a spiritual marker, a moment to notice what we're carrying, what we're resisting, what we're trying to control, and what we're beginning to understand. And perhaps, most importantly, what we're finally ready to release. There is something incredibly symbolic about a lunar eclipse. Astronomically, the Earth moves between the Sun and the Moon. The Earth's shadow falls across the Moon. The Moon hasn't disappeared, it's still there. For a period of time, we're seeing it through a shadow. And spiritually, I think that's a beautiful metaphor for what happens within us. We all carry things beneath the surface, old beliefs, old disappointments, perhaps fears, expectations, memories, patterns, and stories we've been telling ourselves for years. And sometimes those stories have been with us for so long that we don't even recognize them as stories anymore. They simply become, this is who I am. This is what always happens to me, and this is who I'll always be. This is how relationships work. Perhaps people always leave. I have to do everything myself. I can't trust anyone. I have to keep everyone happy. If I'm not in control, something will go wrong. And many of those beliefs have been developed for a reason. At some point in your life, they may have even protected you. If you've experienced instability, control can feel like safety. If you've experienced rejection, keeping yourself small can feel safer than allowing yourself to be seen. If you've been hurt, emotional distance can feel protective. And if you've spent years taking care of everyone else, you may have learned to believe that your own needs always come last. These strategies aren't evidence that something is wrong with us. They're often evidence that at some point we were trying to protect ourselves with the understanding and resources that we had available. The difficulty comes when an old strategy survives long after the situation that created it. Then what once protected us can become limiting to us. Our spiritual growth often brings us face to face with that realization. Sometimes awakening isn't discovering something completely new. Sometimes awakening just is suddenly seeing something old with new eyes. And once we see it, we have a choice. This particular full moon gives us another beautiful layer to work with because the moon is in Pisces, opposite to the Sun in Virgo. Astrologically and symbolically, Pisces is associated with intuition, sensitivity, spirituality, compassion, dreams, imagination, faith, and surrender. And Virgo brings another kind of wisdom to the table: discernment, practicality, organization, analysis, order, the desire to understand. And we do need both. Because spirituality without discernment can become fantasy. But analysis without intuition can keep us trapped inside of our own thinking. Pisces says trust. Virgo says, let's make sure this makes sense. Pisces says, surrender. Virgo says, I'd like to see the plan first, please. And if we're being truthful, most of us have probably heard both of those voices inside of ourselves. We say, Spirit, I trust you, and then quietly add, but if you could send me the complete itinerary, expected arrival time, and perhaps a backup plan, that would be wonderful. That's human. It's so human of us. Wanting clarity isn't spiritual failure. Wanting security isn't spiritual failure. The deeper work is recognizing when our desire for clarity becomes a demand for certainty. Because there is a difference between discernment and control. Discernment helps us make wise choices, and control tries to guarantee the outcome. Our life rarely gives us that guarantee, and this is where surrender becomes important. And surrender is one of those spiritual words that sounds wonderful until you're actually asked to do it. It's so easy to surrender something that we particularly don't care about. Try surrendering something you desperately want. That's a different story. We hear the phrase all the time, just let it go. But human beings don't work like that. We don't only become attached to people or possessions, we become attached to our outcomes, identities, expectations, timelines, dreams. Sometimes we're not even holding on to what actually exists. We're just holding on to what we thought something was going to become. A relationship we thought would develop differently. A career imagined that we'd have by a certain age. A person we hoped we could have changed. A dream that no longer fits. Perhaps a version of ourselves we believed we had to become. And that's why release can sometimes feel like grief. You can grieve something that never actually happened. You can grieve a future that you just imagined. And you can grieve the version of yourself that spent years trying to make something work. And yes, that deserves compassion. Release isn't about pretending something didn't matter. Sometimes release becomes possible because we finally admit how much it did matter. And surrender doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean becoming passive. And it doesn't mean staying in unhealthy situations. It doesn't mean refusing to take action and saying, well, Spirit will handle it. Healthy surrender means recognizing the boundary between what belongs to you and what does not. Your choices belong to you, your actions belong to you, and your boundaries belong to you. Your healing, your willingness to tell yourself the truth belongs to you. Your willingness to change direction belongs to you, but another person's reaction, that does not belong to you. Another person's choices, those aren't yours. The exact timing of every outcome, that's not entirely yours either. You can plant a seed, and you may water it. You can give it sunlight and love, care for the soil, but you cannot stand over the ground shouting, grow faster. And yet emotionally, that's exactly what many of us do. We want healing faster, answers faster, success faster, relationships to resolve faster, opportunities and spirit to answer us faster. And sometimes our suffering isn't coming entirely from the situation itself. Some of it may be coming from our own argument within the timing of the situation. We keep thinking this should be different by now, but reality continues saying this is where you are. Surrender begins when we stop spending all of our energy fighting where we are and begin asking, given that this is where I am, what is the wisest next step that's available to me? That isn't giving away your power, that's reclaiming it. And this brings us to intuition. Because Pisces carries such a strong association with intuition, this eclipse gives us a beautiful opportunity to understand something important. Not every strong feeling is intuition. Fear can feel powerful, so can attachment, so can hope and anxiety, so can desperately wanting something to be true. Intuition isn't simply a feeling we strongly prefer, and intuition doesn't always tell us what we want to hear. Sometimes intuition says not yet. Sometimes it says no. Sometimes it says you've done enough. And sometimes try again, wait. Intuition quietly tells us to walk away from something our ego desperately wants to keep. Fear often creates mental loops. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if I make the wrong decision? What if I lose this? What if nothing else comes along? Fear demands certainty before it will allow us to feel safe. Intuition often has a different quality. It's much quieter, simpler, steadier. There may be a knowing that keeps returning even after you've tried to reason yourself out of it. And here's something very important to ponder. You don't have to act on every intuitive impression immediately. Allow it to sit, observe it, and give it time. See whether it remains consistent once the emotional intensity settles within you. That's where Virgo's discernment supports Pisces' intuition. They're not enemies, they're partners. Intuition can offer direction, while discernment helps us decide how to respond. That's spiritual maturity, not reacting faster, listening more clearly. And as we move towards this eclipse, you may notice emotions, memories, or realizations coming into your awareness. Or not. And I want to say that very clearly. You do not need to manufacture an eclipse experience. There's no spiritual requirement to suddenly become emotional, have vivid dreams, or end a relationship, quit your job, or receive an enormous revelation simply because an eclipse is happening. Spirituality shouldn't make us anxious about whether we're experiencing spirituality correctly. But if something does surface, don't immediately assume you need to get rid of it. Sometimes an emotion needs to be understood before it could be released. Anger may be showing you where a boundary has been crossed. Sadness may be showing you what mattered. And fear may be showing you where you're craving certainty. Disappointment may reveal an expectation that you didn't realize you were carrying. Resentment may show you where you've already repeatedly said yes when you wanted to say no. Exhaustion may be telling you that you've been holding something together for far too long. Emotions aren't always instructions, but they often contain information, and once we understand the information, we can make a more conscious decision about what comes next. And this is where I want to talk about something that doesn't always get enough attention when people discuss eclipses. We hear so much about preparing for them, but what happens after the eclipse has passed? Does August 28th just come and go and suddenly the spiritual work is finished? No, within astrological traditions, eclipses are understood as a part of a larger cycle, rather than just isolated moments whose significance simply switches off when the date and the event ends. And spiritually, I think some of the most valuable work can actually happen afterwards, because the eclipse itself is a moment. Integration is a process. Think about any emotionally significant experience you've ever had. Well, often, while you're standing in the middle of it, you don't completely understand it. You're too close. Your emotions are all involved, and your mind's trying to interpret everything. Understanding frequently comes later, sometimes days later, or weeks. So you don't have to figure everything out on August the 28th. You don't have to wake up in the morning with some enormous revelation. You don't have to perform the perfect ritual at the exact moment of the full moon. And you haven't somehow missed the energy if August 28th passes and you're still processing something. The days afterward gives us something very valuable, distance, and distance can bring us perspective. Imagine stirring sediment from the bottom of a glass of water, and for a while everything becomes cloudy. And if you keep on stirring because you're so desperate to see clearly, the water remains cloudy. But when you finally put the glass down and allow it to become still, the sediment begins to settle. Gradually, you can see through the water again. Our inner world can work much the same way. Sometimes the answer isn't more analysis. Sometimes the answer is allowing what has been stirred to settle. So in the days following the eclipse, don't go searching for something to be wrong. Spiritual awareness isn't hypervigilance. You don't need to examine every conversation, every dream, every inconvenience, and every emotion looking for an eclipse message. Just simply become the observer. Notice what continues to return. Notice what feels different once the emotional intensity settles. And take notice whether something you were desperately trying to control suddenly doesn't feel quite as important. If there was a decision you struggle with, it might begin to feel clearer. Your relationship with something has changed even though external circumstances haven't. That's integration. Reaction says, I feel something, therefore I must do something immediately. Integration says, I feel something, let me understand what it's showing me before I decide what comes next. And if you've discovered this podcast after the 28th, you haven't arrived too late. You can begin exactly where you are, and you can still sit with what has surfaced. You can notice patterns, allow yourself to process, and decide what you're ready to carry forward and what you're finally willing to put down. This is one of the most useful ways to work with this, not by forcing a release, but by allowing clarity. So how do we actually process what we're feeling? You can start by naming it accurately. Instead of everything's terrible, get specific. Maybe you're feeling disappointed, afraid, or grieving. Maybe I'm angry, uncertain, or exhausted. Maybe I'm frustrated because I can't control the outcome. Naming an emotion gives it shape, and then separate what you're feeling from what you're concluding. For example, I'm afraid is a feeling, therefore everything is going to go wrong is a conclusion. Those are not the same thing. You can honor the feeling without automatically accepting the story that your mind has attached to it. Then bring yourself back into the present. What do you actually know? Not what you were afraid might happen, not what might happen not what happened 10 years ago or what somebody else might think. What do you know right now, and then determine what belongs to you. Is there an action you need to take? A conversation, a boundary, perhaps an apology, a decision, or maybe just some rest? Perhaps you've already done what you can do, and if that's the case, the next step may be not more action, it may just be surrender. Release is rarely one dramatic moment where we announce, I've released this, and never think about it again. Sometimes we release something and pick it up back the next morning. Then we notice and put it back down again. That is not failure, that's practice, and maybe practice becomes, I can't control the outcome, but I can choose how I participate. I can't change what happened, but I can decide what I carry forward from it, and I can love someone without taking responsibility for their entire journey. I can deeply desire something without making my peace dependent upon receiving it. The last one can change everything, because surrender doesn't require you to stop wanting something. It asks you to stop handing the thing you want complete control over, your inner peace. And release doesn't always mean rejection. Sometimes we release our need to control something while continuing to care deeply about it. Release can be an expectation without releasing the relationship. Sometimes we release resentment while maintaining a boundary. Release an old version of ourselves without condemning the person we used to be. Sometimes we simply say, that served me once and it does not serve me anymore, and I can now honor what it gave me without continuing to carry it. So wherever you are right now, and if you're able, allow yourself to become still just for a moment. Nothing elaborate. Take one comfortable breath in and slowly let it go. Then another breath and release. And rather than asking Spirit 20 different questions, perhaps offer one simple request. Spirit, help me see clearly what is mine to carry and what I am ready to release. And then allow some quiet. You don't need tingles, you don't need to have a vision, and you don't need the lights to flicker or some dramatic sign. Sometimes spiritual connection is much quieter than what we've been taught to expect. And maybe nothing will come immediately, and that's okay. The practice isn't forcing Spirit to speak on command. The practice is becoming quiet enough that when guidance does come, you recognize it. So as August 28th approaches, don't turn this eclipse into another task. You don't need an elaborate ceremony unless that's meaningful to you. Instead, quietly pay attention and notice where you're trying to force outcomes. Notice where your intuition has been quietly consistent, and when your mind keeps on demanding certainty that life simply cannot provide. When something emotional surfaces, give yourself enough time to understand what it's communicating before what you decide to do about it. Then take one grounded step. Not 20, just one. And if you've realized you're exhausted, perhaps that step is rest. If you've recognized that a boundary is needed, perhaps that step is deciding what that boundary needs to look like. And if you've realized you've been chasing someone else's approval, perhaps the next step is noticing the next time you're tempted to abandon your own truth to receive it. You're recognizing that a chapter is ending, and perhaps you don't need to know what the next chapter contains yet. I want to thank you for sharing this time with me, and as we move towards August 28th, and through the days that follow, give yourself room to listen, use your discernment, trust what remains quietly true when the noise settles. Take the next honest step, and leave enough stillness in your life to hear what Spirit may be trying to tell you. Until next time, walk gently, and together we rise.